Thank you for coming.
Hey, Neil. Thanks for having me on.
Where do you think this stands? Is it closer to just tax cuts or tax reform?
It's got to be both. Tax relief is necessary to give the economy a shot in the arm, and also tax reform is needed for simplification and changing the international system so we can begin to bring some of these jobs and investment back here. So both are important, and by the way, both are popular. You know, the American people are tired of us just talking about it. They want to see us get it done, both in terms of reforming the code to make it simpler, to make it so that jobs aren't leaving our country, money's coming back, but also in terms of tax cuts, particularly middle-class tax cuts.
Now, you're pretty conservative when it comes to tax cuts, and by that I mean with the math, and that you want to make sure they're paid for. Some people call that revenue neutral. Some real diehards within your party say that by definition minimizes the bang for the buck you would get, and that the tax cuts that Senator Portman would want are going to be less than others in your party. Where do you stand on that?
Well, you know, I've talked about this before, but there's a way to do this that's both pro-growth and that has some tax cuts compared to the current code, but also doesn't blow a hole in the deficit. I think you do need to have this revenue neutral discipline in place. This is how you do it. You say, one, that you're going to assume that the baseline for how much taxes are going to be coming into the government is realistic. By that I mean that you keep in place the so-called extenders, particularly the bonus depreciation. That gives you about $450 billion more of tax cuts compared to how the static score would be, or the current system. So that's one way you get tax cuts. And then second is you look at the tax reform proposal and you say, okay, what's this really going to mean in terms of people's behavior? Let's take, for example, if you reduce the taxes on businesses for the things that they buy, depreciation, if you give them a faster write-off, what's that going to mean? Well, it's going to mean actually that there's more economic growth. So that needs to be taken into account. That in turn will result in more revenue. That's called a dynamic score or a macroeconomic score.
But you anticipate that with that dynamic type of accounting, you're anticipating that and trying to peg a number to it. Now, is it your sense that the tax cuts we're looking at, let's say for corporations, should be 15%? The administration seems to be hinting at bring the corporate down to that. Others have argued that's unrealistic. I think Paul Ryan's on record saying 22.5%. What do you think is a realistic expectation for a corporate tax cut?
Well, in the context of what I just talked about, kind of as low as you can, and I think the realistic number is probably closer to 20% than it is 15. And Paul, maybe you're right. Maybe it's 22.5.
Then what about individuals then on that side? So one of the things that has been raised is that maybe you leave the very wealthy out of it, and that might be part of the thinking the president had in making a debt ceiling deal with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that kept the government running for a few more months, maybe longer than that, and that he might get Democratic votes for something that doesn't include a tax cut on the wealthy. Would you be for that?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how it all comes together. On the business side, we just talked about the 20% say, that's as compared to 35%. Right. So it's a substantial reduction in the rate. No, I know,
that is substantial, but would you be okay on the individual rates, the rich not getting a tax cut?
Well, look, I think the key there, as I said earlier, is middle-class tax cuts. Not just because it's the right thing to do in terms of the economy and so on, but it's going to be more popular as well. So right now, I think the biggest challenge we have in our economy, and again, you and I have talked about this, is wages have been flat. When you look back over the last couple of decades, you really haven't seen an increase in wage growth, but you have seen an increase in expenses.
So a tax cut, you'd be open on that, retroactive to the beginning of the year if you're running late on getting this thing passed. Would you be open to that?
You know, I'm not big on retroactivity, period. I think it ought to be prospective. But yeah, I think we ought to be putting in place something that really gives the economy a shot in the arm, so pro-growth. And then we also ought to be sure we're giving people in the middle some relief so that
I know, I'm sorry, sir, I'm not clear. Would you be for them being retroactive?
No, I'm not interested in, I mean, retroactivity, I think, as a matter of principle, is a tough thing because it's really not fair to people who planned.
All right, Rob Portman, Ohio Senator, thank you very, very much, sir. I appreciate it.
Great to talk, as always.
All right, he's